Root here. Picture two people who make the exact same decision on the exact same day, except they choose opposite paths, and 20 years later they're both convinced they made the smarter call. One of them poured cash into a home he doesn't fully own yet. The other stumbled into a small fortune she may never actually claim. Run the honest math across 2 decades and the outcome isn't what you'd expect, and it all pivots on one factor almost nobody checks. I'm Root. Let's keep this completely fair. Marcus and Sophie are identical on paper. Same age, same $90,000 salary, same city, same $50,000 in savings. The only thing that differs is what happens on one ordinary Tuesday. Marcus signs a mortgage, partly because his uncle Gary has spent 10 years insisting that renting is throwing money away. Sophie signs a lease. 2 decades from now, one of them turns out to be right, and the reason will surprise you. Start with Marcus, because Marcus is having the best week of his life. He buys a median-priced American home, currently running about $415,000. He puts down 10%, which is $41,500, and finances the rest at roughly 6.5% on a 30-year fixed loan. His monthly principal and interest payment lands around $2,360. At closing, he signs roughly 40 documents, hands over another $10,000 in closing costs he mostly forgot to plan for, and walks away with a key. Marcus now owns something. He can paint every wall whatever color he wants and no one can stop him. For about a week, he's the happiest man alive. Sophie rents the identical house down the street for $2,000 a month. No down payment, no closing costs, no key ceremony, no 40 documents, no housewarming party. She takes the $41,500 Marcus used as a down payment, adds the $10,000 he burned on closing costs, and puts the full $51,000 into a plain total market index fund. Then she sets up an automatic transfer to cover the gap between her rent and what Marcus's house truly costs him each month, and she doesn't think about it again. Nobody asks for a tour of Sophie's place. She got a confirmation email instead, no cheese plate included, and nobody drove across town to stand in her kitchen judging her countertops. Day 1, Marcus has a house, a mailbox with his name on it, and a story for dinner parties. Sophie has an email. It's not close in terms of how it feels. But feelings and math have never been the same thing, and this is where the gap between them starts opening in a direction nobody at the housewarming would guess. Here's the number everyone fixates on, the mortgage payment, $2,360 a month. That's the figure Marcus proudly compares to Sophie's $2,000 rent, smiling because his payment builds equity while hers just disappears. Except there's a problem with that comparison, the mortgage payment isn't what the house actually costs. It's just the down payment on the real cost. Property taxes run about 1% of the home's value annually, adding roughly $350 a month, and that climbs every time the county reassesses the home's value upward. Homeowner's insurance costs him around $200 a month, and it's risen nearly 50% in 5 years because severe weather increased and insurers took notice. Private mortgage insurance, since Marcus put down less than 20%, tax on about $150 a month as a penalty for not already being wealthy, until he slowly builds his way to 20% equity years later. Then there's maintenance, the silent budget killer. The rule of thumb is 1 to 2% of the home's value per year, another $350 to $700 a month on average, except it never shows up as a tidy monthly bill. It shows up as a water heater dying in February, or a roof failing at the worst possible moment and disappearing $8,000 in a single afternoon. Those large expenses aren't bad luck, they're scheduled. Roofs last about 20 years, furnaces about 15, water heaters about 10, and each one guarantees a 4 or 5 figure bill with Marcus's name on it. The roof doesn't care what month it is, it has its own calendar and Marcus wasn't invited to that meeting. Funny enough, Uncle Gary's big speech about building equity never once mentioned the roof. Add it all up, and Marcus isn't really spending $2,360 a month on his house, he's spending closer to $3,400. Sophie's all-in cost is $2,015, renter's insurance included, since that costs about as much as 2 cups of coffee. So the real gap between them isn't a rounding error, it's roughly $1,400 a month, and every dollar of it flows into Sophie's index fund while Marcus stands in his kitchen at 10 p.m. arguing with a plumber about a part. Before you assume Marcus simply picked the wrong house, here's a tool you can borrow to check your own place in about 10 seconds, the 5% rule. Take the home's price, multiply by 5%, and divide by 12. On Marcus's $415,000 house, that comes out to roughly $1,700 a month, the true, unrecoverable cost of ownership, taxes, upkeep, and what your down payment could have earned elsewhere, none of which you ever get back. If you can rent the same place for less than that number, renting wins on paper. If comparable rent costs more, buying pulls ahead. Run your own address through it before this video ends. Marcus is paying $1,700 to own, and Sophie is paying $2,000 to rent, which makes this a near coin flip, exactly why it deserves real math instead of a one-liner from your uncle. Fast forward 3 years and see who's ahead, because at year 3 it's not subtle. Sophie's portfolio, the $51,000 she started with plus $1,400 a month at a normal market return, sits around $80,000. Marcus has built something too, though far less than he assumes. He's chipped a small sliver off his loan, and it truly is a sliver, because in the early years of a 30-year mortgage almost none of the payment touches the principal. Here's the statistic that belongs on every closing table and never appears. Over the full 30 years, Marcus will pay nearly the entire price of the house again, just in interest, and he won't put a single dollar more toward the home than toward the bank until around year 18. Right now he isn't paying off a house, he's renting money, and the house is barely his. Still, between that thin slice of principal and modest appreciation, on paper he's got maybe $50,000 in equity. That sounds respectable until you factor in the exit. If Marcus sold at year 3, he'd hand a realtor 5 to 6% of the sale price on the way out, over $20,000, plus his own closing costs, and no, that didn't meaningfully change after the big realtor lawsuit everyone expected to end commissions. They still take their cut. After the exit toll, Marcus's first 3 years of ownership have netted him almost nothing. He didn't buy an asset, he rented one from a bank and paid extra for the privilege. Now, stopping right there would mean doing exactly what every Rent Forever voice online does, showing half the math and calling it a verdict. So let's be fair to Marcus, because he's holding one enormous weapon Sophie doesn't have, leverage. Marcus put down $41,500 but controls a $415,000 asset. When that house rises 4% in a year, that's $16,000 of appreciation sitting on top of a $41,000 bet, the bank's money making Marcus richer. Sophie's sensible index fund isn't leveraged 5 to 1. It's the one advantage real estate holds that stock investors can't easily replicate, and it's the reason real estate has created more everyday millionaires than the stock market has. Uncle Gary, for once, was standing next to something true. Marcus also has the tax code partly on his side. He can deduct mortgage interest, and when he eventually sells, the first $250,000 of profit, or $500,000 if he's married, is completely tax-free, a break Sophie's brokerage account will never receive. To be fair, that mortgage deduction is far smaller than the legend suggests. After tax rules changed a few years back, only about 1 in 10 people even itemize anymore, so most homeowners get nothing from that famous deduction their uncle keeps bragging about. But the tax-free profit on the sale of his primary residence is very real and very significant. There's a second force working in Marcus's favor that takes years to show up: his payment is frozen. That $2,360 mortgage costs the same in year 5 as it did on day 1. Sophie's rent, meanwhile, has been climbing about 4% a year, the way rent always does, quietly, on a renewal letter she barely reads. Give it 5 years and Marcus's house is worth more, his loan is smaller, his payment hasn't moved a dollar, and the $1,400 monthly gap that was feeding Sophie's portfolio has started shrinking. The buyer is clawing his way back into the fight. Sophie's path carries its own hidden cost, one that never shows up in a tidy average. Her portfolio doesn't climb in a smooth, comforting line, some years it falls off a cliff. In a bad crash it can drop 30% in a matter of weeks, and watching $100,000 evaporate on a screen is exactly the kind of thing that makes ordinary people panic sell at the worst possible moment, locking in the loss permanently. Marcus's house never flashes a red number at him over morning coffee. It just sits there, boring, solid, and lived in, and that steadiness is worth something real even if a spreadsheet refuses to price it. Somewhere around year 6 or 7, the thing nobody in this debate likes to admit finally happens: they tie. This is the break-even point, the exact moment the buyer's brutal early losses and the renter's early lead cancel each other out. Nationally, that crossover lands around 6 years. Before it, renting wins almost every time. After it, the math starts tilting slowly and steadily toward the person with the fixed mortgage. Marcus doesn't feel it happen. Sophie doesn't feel it either. But the curve has bent, and it's bending his way. By the 10-year mark, they're standing on roughly even ground, and this is where it gets interesting, because even is hiding two completely different lives. Marcus got here by pouring hundreds of hours into one house, lost weekends fighting the gutters, a kitchen remodel he's still paying off, a decade emotionally handcuffed to one asset in one zip code, hoping the neighborhood doesn't decline. Sophie reached the same number by doing mechanically almost nothing. She never fixed a thing, never lost a Saturday to a hardware store. She owns a slice of 500 companies instead of one aging roof, and she could convert the whole pile to cash by Friday. Same net worth, wildly different price of admission. Marcus worked for his, Sophie waited for hers. And Sophie's freedom isn't just financial, it's literal. If a dream job opens up across the country, she gives 30 days notice, packs a truck, and she's gone. No realtor, no staging, no praying the market cooperates on her timeline. If Marcus gets that same call, he has to sell an entire house first, eat that 5 to 6% exit toll all over again, and hope a buyer shows up before the opportunity disappears. Sophie bought optionality. Marcus bought roots. Both are worth something, but only one of them lets you change your whole life on a Tuesday. Then time does something to Marcus that it never does to Sophie, it makes him cheaper. That frozen mortgage that felt so heavy in year one gets lighter every year, because his income drifts upward while his payment stays put. Sophie's rent, meanwhile, has marched from $2,000 toward nearly $3,000, and it's never coming back down. Push this far enough out and Marcus's mortgage simply ends. It's gone. He lives in that house for the cost of property taxes and the occasional furnace, while Sophie is still writing a rent check the month she turns 80. That's the part the spreadsheet doesn't shout loudly enough, and it's the strongest card Marcus holds. So who wins at 20 years? If Marcus's house appreciated at a healthy clip and Sophie got sloppy and spent her savings, Marcus wins, and it isn't close. His house is worth well over $500,000, his mortgage is nearly gone. And his equity sits north of $500,000. But if Sophie truly invested that monthly difference the way she promised herself she would, her portfolio lands in that same range, $500,000 to $600,000, except hers is liquid, diversified, and never once needed a new roof. Line up the final net worth and they're in the same ballpark. How they got there is a completely different planet. Now for the detail I promised would flip the whole thing. It actually turns out to be two details, and together they decide everything. The first is how fast home prices actually rise, because everyone assumes real estate is an unstoppable rocket, and it isn't. Strip out inflation, and American home prices have risen about 1% a year over the long run, just 1%. Over that same century, stocks returned roughly 7% a year after inflation. So every time someone runs this comparison using an optimistic appreciation number, they're pressing a thumb on the scale for Marcus. Run it with the honest historical 1% figure, and Sophie doesn't just tie, she pulls ahead and keeps pulling. Marcus bought a slow, heavy asset with high friction and a leaky roof and called it an investment. Sophie bought the entire economy and paid almost nothing to hold it. And there's a risk buried in Marcus's win that nobody prints on the brochure. His entire net worth is one house, on one street, in one town, chained to one local job market. If the major employer leaves town or a storm parks itself directly over his roof, his single undiversified asset absorbs the full hit, and he can't exactly sell off the spare bathroom to raise cash. Sophie's money is spread across 500 companies on several continents. One of them could collapse entirely on a Tuesday and she'd never feel it. This is the thing the internet consistently gets wrong about money, sometimes on purpose, because buy a house, it always goes up, makes a far better headline than it depends on about 9 different variables. If you want the version of this math tailored to your city, your rent, and your real interest rate instead of a slogan on a thumbnail, that's the entire reason our community exists. We run these numbers for real people in real markets, and the link is right below this video. The second variable quietly decides the whole argument, and it has nothing to do with houses, it's whether the renter actually invests. On paper, in plenty of markets, Sophie wins. In the real world, most renters are not Sophie. The median renter in this country has almost nothing invested, a few hundred to a couple $1,000s year after year, because the $1,400 a month that was supposed to flow into index funds instead flowed into takeout, a nicer car, and a weekend that got out of hand. That's the buyer's real secret weapon, and it's almost embarrassingly simple. A mortgage is a savings plan you're not allowed to skip. It forces Marcus to build wealth whether he feels like it that month or not, which is the real reason the typical homeowner ends up worth nearly 40 times the typical renter, not because bricks are magic, but because most people, left to their own devices, don't save, and the bank made Marcus do it at gunpoint. So maybe Uncle Gary wasn't completely wrong after all, he just had the right answer for entirely the wrong reason. So let's be straight about both of them, because neither one is the fool the other thinks he is. Renting wins if you're disciplined enough to actually invest every dollar you save, if you're likely to move within a few years, or if you live somewhere prices are so inflated relative to rents that buying never catches up, places like San Francisco, where the math never crosses over, not even at 30 years. Buying wins if you're going to stay put 7 years or more, if rents in your area run high against home prices, or, the big one, if you know deep down you're never actually going to invest the difference. If that money is going to get spent anyway, buy the house. The house will save you from yourself. Because here's what Marcus and Sophie both missed, one at the closing table, one at the lease signing. Neither of them ever ran their own real numbers, their city, their rent, their rate, their honest odds of staying put, their honest odds of staying disciplined. Marcus bought because Uncle Gary said renting is throwing money away. Sophie rented because a video told her homeowners are suckers. 20 years later, look at what each of them actually held. A key that cost Marcus $8,000 every few years and finally turned free the month the mortgage died, and a confirmation email that just sat there compounding the entire time. Both choices worked. Neither was luck. The real trap was never renting, and it was never buying. The real trap is picking a side based on a slogan and never doing the arithmetic for your own life, which, if you take away one thing from all of this, is the whole point, and the entire reason I keep running these numbers with the people who actually show up for it. I promised you a winner at the start of this video. The honest answer is that there isn't one, and that's the entire point. And if you're wondering what happens when you do both, own a home and invest aggressively at the same time, that's a completely different video, and the math might surprise you all over again. But for now, the next time someone tells you renting is throwing money away, or that buying is always the smart move, ask them one quiet question: did you include everything? Because the only answer worth trusting is the one that does.